The sun blazed over Clearwater Junction, burning the red dirt road until it shimmered like glass. Sarah McKenna stood in the small yard of the Henderson Ranch, the only home she had known since her husband's death. Dust and silence filled the space between her and the family who had once called her daughter. Martha Henderson's eyes were hard as flint. 6 months, Sarah. 6 months we've fed you, given you a roof, and for what? A woman ought to earn her keep. I have, Sarah said, her voice shaking. I've mended, cooked, tended your fields. Thomas Henderson cut her off with a sharp spit into the dirt. You call that work? A proper wife would have given my brother sons. The words stung worse than the August heat. Sarah had lost 3 babies in 3 years. Each loss had carved a hollow place inside her, and now they threw those wounds at her like stones. Martha folded her arms. James is gone. You've had your charity. You'll be leaving today. Leaving? Sarah's heart kicked against her ribs. I have nowhere else to go. Then start walking, Thomas said. Everything here was bought with Henderson money. You'll take nothing that isn't yours. Her knees weakened. The townsfolk had begun to gather by the fence, curious. No one moved to help. No one ever crossed the Hendersons. Sarah forced herself to stand straighter. You'd put me out with nothing? Martha's thin smile barely moved. You came to us with nothing. You will leave the same. The air felt thick enough to choke her. Around her, the whisper of neighbors rose like dry grass in the wind. Pity from some, judgment from others. Sarah's throat ached, but she said nothing more. She turned, gathering what dignity she had left, and stepped toward the gate. Each stride burned her bare feet through worn, thin soles. The crowd parted, murmuring. Somewhere a woman gasped. Sarah didn't look back. Get off our land, widow, Thomas called after her, and don't come begging when winter comes. She kept walking. Past the fence, past the well, onto the road that led toward town. The sky stretched endless and pitiless above her. She had nothing but the faded calico dress on her back and the echo of a life that had fallen apart piece by piece. Then the murmurs behind her stilled. A new sound replaced them. Hoofbeats, slow and heavy, coming up the road. Sarah turned. Through the haze of heat came a rider on a tall bay horse. The man looked carved from the land itself. Broad-shouldered, coat dusted from long travel, eyes like a storm-filled sky. She knew that face, though only from whispers. Elias Boon, the solitary rancher who lived beyond the western ridge. Folks said he spoke little, trusted less, and worked land so rough even coyotes kept their distance. He guided his horse straight through the gathered onlookers until he stopped before Sarah. For a long moment he said nothing, only looked, first at her, then at the Hendersons standing smug behind the fence. Without a word, he dismounted, removed his long duster coat, and placed it over Sarah's shoulders. The fabric was heavy, smelling of leather and sage. The crowd held its breath. Thomas Henderson took a step forward. This ain't your affair, Boone. Quote, Elias's voice came quiet, deep as thunder. You made it my affair when you shamed her in front of half the county. You planning to play her hero now? Thomas sneered. She don't belong to you. She doesn't belong to anyone, Boone said. But she won't be sleeping in the dust tonight. He looked down at Sarah. Come on. I don't know you, she whispered. No, he said simply, but you will. You're coming with me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Martha sputtered. You can't just take her. I'm not taking, Boone said. She's choosing. All eyes turned to Sarah. She looked at the faces that had turned from her, the house that had never been hers, the life that had ended the day James died. Then she looked at the man who'd given her his coat without asking anything in return. Her voice trembled, but carried. I choose to go. Boone nodded once, swung up into the saddle, and reached down a massive hand. Sarah hesitated for only a heartbeat before taking it. He lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing. As the horse turned toward the open road, the crowd's silence broke into whispers, half scandal, half awe. Thomas shouted something about the sheriff, but his words were lost in the dust the horse kicked up. Sarah didn't look back again. The wind caught her hair, the coat heavy and safe around her. She had no idea where this man would take her or what waited beyond the hills. But for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. The town of Clearwater Junction shrank behind them. Before her stretched the wide, wild land, harsh, uncertain, and full of possibility. And beside her rode the giant rancher who had looked at her shame and seen worth instead. The road west of Clearwater Junction wound through dry hills and patches of sagebrush, the air carrying the scent of dust and distant rain. Sarah sat sideways in the saddle, wrapped in Elias Boon's coat, her heart pounding from everything that had just happened. The man behind her rode with quiet certainty, guiding the horse as if it were part of him. Every step took them farther from the town that had turned its back on her, and closer to a future she couldn't yet imagine. After a long silence, Sarah spoke, her voice small. "You didn't have to do that. They'll hate you for it now." Elias's deep voice came steady as the rhythm of the horse's hooves. "They already did. I just gave them a reason they can name." Sarah almost smiled despite herself. "Why did you help me?" He was quiet for a moment before answering. "Because no one else did." They rode on in silence again. The sun dipped lower, painting the hills in gold and copper. Every mile made Sarah's shoulders ease a little more, though fear still lingered beneath the relief. What did he want from her? Why take in a woman with no dowry, no family, no place to go? By the time the stars began to show, they reached a narrow valley where a small creek wound between cottonwoods. Elias reined in the horse and dismounted. He turned, offering his hand to help her down. "Rest here tonight," he said. "There's water and shelter enough." Quote. Sarah's legs trembled when her feet touched the ground. She had walked through storms and grief before, but never like this. Never with the weight of a whole town's scorn behind her. Elias led the horse to drink, then unpacked a bedroll and some supplies. He worked without words, every movement efficient, like a man who'd done this 100 times. When he lit a small fire, the glow touched his face, strong features, sharp and serious, but not unkind. Sarah sat across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "You live out here alone?" He nodded. "Closest neighbor's 15 miles. Don't you get lonely?" "Sometimes," he said, "but peace has its price, same as noise." She looked into the fire, thinking of the noise she'd left behind, the cruel words, the laughter, the whispers. "I don't know what to do now." "Eat first," he said, handing her a piece of jerky and hard bread. Decisions come easier on a full stomach. The simple food tasted better than any she'd had in weeks. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until now. When they finished, Elias poured water from a canteen. "You can sleep here by the fire. I'll keep watch." "You don't have to," she murmured. He met her eyes. "Out here, we do what has to be done." Something in his tone silenced her protests. She spread her blanket near the fire, the warmth easing her sore muscles. The night sky above stretched endless, the stars sharp and close. Elias sat nearby, sharpening a knife, his silhouette solid and still. The steady scrape of metal on stone became a strange comfort. Sarah found herself watching him through half-closed eyes until sleep pulled her under. When she woke at dawn, mist hung over the creek, and the fire had burned low. Elias was already saddling the horse, his movements quiet. "Morning," she said softly, rising and brushing dust from her dress. He handed her a tin cup of coffee. "Drink. We'll ride soon." "Where are we going?" "My ranch," he said simply, "a place called Boone Hollow. You'll be safe there until you decide what's next." Sarah hesitated, the cup warm in her hands. "You don't even know me." Quote. He looked at her, steady and calm. "Don't need to. I saw enough." They rode again, climbing into the high country where pine trees replaced scrub and the air grew cooler. The land changed from barren to alive. Streams cutting through green meadows, hawks circling overhead, deer flashing through the brush. It was beautiful, and it frightened her all the same. Beauty meant hope, and hope hurt when you'd lost too much. By noon, they reached a ridge that opened onto a wide valley. Nestled between the mountains stood a cabin of hand-cut logs, a barn, a corral, and fields ready for harvest. Smoke rose faintly from a chimney. Sarah caught her breath. "You built this?" Quote. He nodded once, piece by piece. "It's beautiful." "It's quiet," he said, as if that was beauty enough. He helped her down from the saddle and carried her small carpet bag inside. The cabin was neat and sturdy. Simple furniture, a stone hearth, shelves lined with jars and tools. It felt lived in, but not lonely. "You can have the bedroom," he said. "I'll stay in the barn till we figure something out." Quote. "That's not right," Sarah protested. "It's your home. You need rest. I've got a bedroll." His tone allowed no argument. When he stepped outside to tend the horse, Sarah stood in the middle of the cabin, looking around. For the first time since James's death, she felt the faint stir of safety, not comfort yet, not peace, but the small, steady start of both. She washed her face, unpacked her few things, and sat by the window. Outside, Elias worked with the same quiet focus as before, mending a fence line near the barn. The coat he'd given her hung over a chair. She touched it lightly, remembering the moment he'd placed it on her shoulders in front of everyone. That act had changed everything, not just her circumstances, but something inside her. When he returned, she had a meal ready from the stores she'd found: beans, cornbread, and coffee. He looked almost startled. "Didn't expect that." "You rescued me," she said simply. "Least I can do is make supper." They ate in silence, the quiet comfortable this time. When the meal was done, she washed the dishes, and he dried them without being asked. As the fire burned low, Sarah glanced at him. "What happens now?" "You rest. Tomorrow we talk about what you want," he said. "You don't owe me anything, Sarah." She met his eyes. "Maybe not. But I think I owe myself a new beginning." He nodded once, slow and approving. "Then, that's where we'll start." Outside, the night gathered soft around the cabin. Inside, the woman who'd lost everything and the man who'd given her shelter sat in the quiet glow of the fire. Two strangers bound by decency and something deeper neither yet dared to name. Autumn came early to Boone Hollow. The air turned crisp, the mornings filled with the scent of pine and wood smoke. Sarah had been there almost 2 months now, long enough for the valley to start feeling like home. She rose before sunrise, baked bread, milked the cows, fed the hens, and worked beside Elias through the long days. They spoke little at first. Elias wasn't a man of many words, but Sarah had come to understand his silences. Some meant thought, some meant care, and some were simply peace. She found comfort in them. The quiet of the valley no longer frightened her, it steadied her heart. One evening, after a long day of mending fences, they sat outside watching the sunset paint the sky in red and gold. Sarah held a cup of coffee between her hands, letting the warmth sink into her skin. "I used to think quiet meant loneliness," she said softly. "Now it feels like something else, like the world catching its breath." Elias nodded, eyes on the horizon. "Noise don't always mean life. Sometimes it's just people trying to fill the emptiness." She smiled faintly. "You don't seem empty." "Not since you came here," he said simply. The words made her chest tighten. They weren't spoken like flattery, just truth, plain and steady as the man himself. The days passed in rhythm. Together they repaired the barn roof before the snows came, harvested the last of the garden, and stacked wood for winter. Sarah had started sewing new curtains for the windows, softening the cabin's hard edges. The place no longer looked like a fortress. It looked like a home. But the peace didn't last. One gray morning, as Sarah kneaded bread at the table, the dogs began to bark outside. She looked out the window and froze. 5 riders were coming down the trail, Thomas and Samuel Henderson among them. Elias was already at the door, rifle in hand. "Stay inside," he said quietly. Sarah's stomach turned cold. "They've come for me." He stepped out onto the porch. Maybe, but they'll leave the way they came. Sarah watched through the window, heart hammering as the men dismounted. Thomas's voice carried sharp through the thin mountain air. "Boon, we're taking the widow home. You've got no right to keep her here." "She's free to go if she wants," Elias answered. "But if she don't, you'll ride back empty." Thomas sneered. "You think you can stand against my family? The law's on our side." "The law?" Elias said. "You mean the one that let you throw her into the dirt? The same law that watched and said nothing?" Samuel shifted uneasily. "We're not here for trouble. Ma just wants what's right." Sarah couldn't stay silent any longer. She pushed open the cabin door and stepped outside, her apron still dusted with flour. "What's right?" she said. "You left me with nothing, Samuel. You called me a burden and drove me from your house." Thomas's face twisted with anger. "You think living with this man makes you respectable? You've shamed our family name." Sarah's voice didn't shake this time. "No, Thomas. You shamed it when you forgot what decency meant." The hired men who'd ridden with the brothers shifted uneasily in their saddles. They hadn't expected to find a woman standing tall, calm, and unafraid beside the man they called a hermit. Elias took one step forward, his voice quiet but solid as stone. "You're done here. Turn around before pride makes you foolish." Thomas's hand moved toward his gun, but Samuel caught his arm. "She's made her choice, brother," he said, his tone weary. "Let's go home." For a moment, no one moved. Then Thomas cursed under his breath, turned his horse, and rode off the way he came. The others followed, the sound of their hooves fading into the wind. When the last of them disappeared beyond the ridge, Sarah's knees gave out. Elias caught her before she fell. "It's over," he said quietly. Her voice trembled. "You think they'll come back?" He shook his head. "No. They saw something today they can't take from you." "What's that?" "Your strength." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes, but this time they weren't from fear. She looked up at him, the man who had given her his coat, his home, and his faith when no one else had, and saw not just safety, but belonging. Winter came hard and white. The days grew shorter, the nights longer, but in the cabin at Boone Hollow, warmth bloomed between shared meals, quiet laughter, and the gentle trust that grew stronger each day. By spring, Sarah's garden was full of life again. Rosemary, beans, corn, and sunflowers swayed in the breeze. One morning, she stood on the porch, the valley glowing green and gold before her, when Elias joined her with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "You ever think about going back to town?" he asked. She smiled. "No reason to. Everything I need is here." He studied her for a long moment. "You sure?" quote. Sarah turned toward him. "I've never been surer of anything." They stood side by side, watching the sunrise over their land, their home. The woman who had once been cast out in shame now stood free and unbroken, her heart steady as the mountains around her. And the man who had spoken only 5 words that changed her life, "You're coming with me," had become her greatest comfort, her partner, and her peace. The wind moved through the valley like a whispered prayer, carrying with it the scent of sage and hope. Elias glanced at her with a rare smile. "Reckon the West's a hard place," he said, "but it can grow something strong if you let it." Sarah nodded, her eyes on the horizon. "It did," she said. "It grew us."